I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be talking to Susan Kelechi Watson all about her Netflix series, The Residents. And one of the things that I find so interesting in how you've approached this character in playing Jasmine is that the show has a lot of comedic elements, but stylistically, you kind of come in as the straight person. And I was interested in how, when you looked at the comedic tone and the different spaces it went to on the page, how you really worked to find the way that that was going to inhabit this character.
Oh, such a good question because that was something for me that was really hard. Because I tend to find the funny like in what it's sort of my natural bend is to try to find the funny. And so recognized pretty quickly because the script is so witty, it's so smart, it's so quick, that there was a lot of funny going on, but it wasn't necessarily coming from me. And I had to figure out like, oh, how do I play this or calibrate this, or when is she kind of funny and when is she really the straight person, and also understanding the dynamics of what's necessary to make a scene funny. Like you have to be willing to have somebody who is that straight person to play against, that can kind of hold that line and the funny can bounce off of it in a way that makes it even stronger, it makes it pop even more. So I have a respect for both sides of it, like the joke teller and the person who kind of sets it up. And comedy is really knowing the importance both. And for me, it was definitely more about how do I find this character so that I can then keep that toe that line of like what's straight and what's funny, and but I'm just being honest to the character. And so I called on acting coach, Warner McLaughlin, and she sorry, Warner Laughlin, that's it, um, who helped me. And she and I hadn't worked really with an acting coach before, but I felt like wow, I really was like I couldn't quite outline Jasmine as easily as I could other characters, and I wanted her to feel really specific. And so Warner was really a great help in like just helping me kind of create a world, her world outside of what was on the page, and brought that back in. And I found where she was, I found where she lived in my body, and then I felt more at ease to be that the straight person or the person in the room who was sort of setting up and providing the information, but all the while really suspicious and really kind of like, what is she about really? And, she's always turning over things in her mind. So you still have to play the circumstances. You have to still play like everybody's shady in this. Nobody's hands are completely clean. But um but above all, just being honest to like who Jasmine was. So that was really a great help for me.
There's also the aspect that you had to uncover in how to play her with this is someone who professionally it's part of her job to keep her emotions at bay and to not
That's right.
give too much of herself in any sort of situation. It's about making space for other people and really absorbing a lot. And how did
Hmm.
that create an interesting challenge in really figuring out, again, how to make her feel fully fleshed out and like a very real person, but still
Hmm.
withholding some of those elements?
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Well, that to me is what made her interesting. So the scenes where she gets to kind of blow up and like you see her blow off steam, or you see her get angry, or like saying this, what's really going on, or like when she gets to pull Cup aside and go, I didn't want to say anything, but you know what I mean? And you start to see some of this, what's bubbling on the inside of her come out. That made it even more fun because it's always something going on. So it's just a matter of if I'm saying it or not. But because I'm not saying it doesn't mean it's not happening. So you can't look at it that way. You got to look at it like I know everything I'm not saying. And in my mind, in my heart right now, I'm yelling those things. I just can't say it. And that adds to sort of the complexity of the character. And makes it more fun to play. So you're never like playing like one thing at once. So, physically I'm being quiet, but sort of mentally and on the inside, she's fighting a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings and a lot of her own interpretation of what's happening, a lot of her own hurt and disappointment. Um, and and it's funneled through this sort of silence. Yeah.
No, and with everything that you're describing as well, did you find that there was like a real art in terms of the aspect of acting listening in so much of this? Because there's so many moments where you have the whole ensemble cast in a room, and
Mhm.
very often it's Cordelia going through things, or she'll be questioning one person, but the rest of you are all witnesses to things throughout
Yeah.
so much of the series. And how did that create an interesting dynamic for a lot of scenes?
I've learned like you really always have to keep the ball alive, right? Even though she's doing what she's doing, you still got to like keep that ball. You never know when the camera's swinging around to you. You never know. But also, I'm just a big fan of like when you're in a room with other actors, always giving to that actor who is doing the thing. Like we're always contributing to that environment that makes it feel more honest for the person who maybe the camera is mostly focused on. I don't I don't I don't feel like you should ever turn that off. And I've found that to be a challenge take after take. Now that's something that sometimes I look and I was like, was I even listening? Like sometimes I'll catch myself, but I was like, but I know I was. But you got to be mindful. Were you for 17 takes? You know what I'm saying? Because you might have been for the first 10, and then like the last seven, you thought, oh, they got it. You know what I'm saying? So it really is important to always kind of keep that ball in the air, especially as part of an ensemble.
And you were bringing up before that obviously we get to see that side of Jasmine where she's really angry and she's really frustrated, and it does come to the surface. And what's great is when we first meet her at the beginning of episode 1 and she's drinking and she's clearly really not okay, we know that that's already out of character for her without ever seeing the other
Mhm.
side of it. And so
Right.
how do you find what you wanted that to look and feel like?
Yeah, you want it to feel like, oh, she having a bad day, child. I don't know what's going on with Jazz, but honey, but this ain't right. Her blazer's not buttoned. She's sitting in the blue room. Like these things seem off, you know. Um, I love that because it juxtaposes me in the Senate hearing room, and it's very buttoned up and all. And then she's obviously can't answer, the senator's next question, and you zoom into like what she's thinking about, and you meet her and Riley in this room and Raleigh in this room, and it's very, he's like, "What are you doing?" Um, so it's a great introduction. I love when introductions kind of um leave you a little off balanced. Like you thought you knew what this person's going to be about, and then you're like, "Wait, what is this about?" Obviously, something has happened, and you want to find out what has happened. Um, and I think Paul is really great about that in the script. He set people up one way, and then you get this curveball, and they go in another direction.
And the details that go into her job and that role of being an usher at the White House and the residence is so interesting to look at because it's very much built on interpersonal dynamics and relationships. And I know that you got the chance to talk to someone who's been an usher at the White House during
Mhm.
rehearsals. How did that really help cement some of the ideas that you'd already conceptualized of what this might look like?
It helped because she sort of confirmed certain things. It was okay to be reserved and quiet. Actually, that is your job. Like that was something that I didn't have to worry too much about. I understood where this character um, was coming from in terms of how they would really be in the White House. And I held on to that. I held on to a lot of the behaviors and the isms that she told me come along with being the usher, um, being seen and not heard, being a fly on the wall, not getting emotional about what administration is in and what administration is out, just really being somebody who's there to make this White House run, and who, more than anything, somebody who just really actually loves the White House. Like, I feel like one of Haley's stories was the fact that she grew up loving what happens in the White House, like knowing all the presidents and wanting to know about the history, and I incorporated a lot of that story. Was like, oh, I love this as an institution, not necessarily each president, but this as an institution and what it represents. And I want to be a part of what makes this run, because I love it. And so she had to be, for me, somebody who really loved her job, so much so that she didn't have a family. She doesn't want to be anything else but the chief usher. She wants to make this run. And that raised the stakes a lot. that raised her investment in this a lot and how deeply she wanted that job.
And there's also the love that she has with her relationship with AB. You know, she literally describes it as, I loved him, and that was her feeling
Hmm.
towards him. And I think even the conversation that they have together, where they both admit things feel a little different with this administration, and we don't know that this feels good to either of us, shows how much
Hmm.
they trust each other to even say it out loud, because their job
Hmm.
is to roll with whoever comes in and just,
Right,
you know, be good with that.
right.
And so how did you want to create this real intimacy and trust and that sense of love that exists between the two of them?
It was really lovely to do that with Giancarlo because we were doing that off screen as well, and we there was a trust there just in us working together. And in a murder mystery, honestly, one of the things you really want to do is invest in all of the characters' emotional connections. Because the more you do that, the more it throws people for a loop. The best thing you can do is be as authentic as honest in every moment as possible, because then you don't really know where they're going next, but you also believe them. Like you believe that moment where they're like loving on each other, and you can also very much believe that she would take a knife to this man for letting her, you know, lose her job, or threatening, everything that she was hoping for. He poses a threat to now. So that investment, I think, had to be there and had to feel alive and had to feel authentic in order for um I think in order for it to be believable either way, that she could or she couldn't do it.
And you also get this sense between them, you know, because obviously she's worked under him probably the entire time that she's been at the White House, and that he's been this real mentorship figure and she's really learned from him. But also that from being there for so long, that she has her own ideas and her own thoughts about how to do things and to do things a little bit differently in a way that stylistically fits her. And so, how did you find the spaces of this is where she's going to kind of mimic him and really represent everything that he's taught her, and here's where she has her own ideas and her own notions of things as well?
Yeah, I think the point was like he was the old guard and she was the new guard, and she was trying to bring some kind of new life and understanding to this, and be a little bit more, maybe a little bit more understanding and a little bit more, um kind of play the middle a little bit more for people. And I and I chose to play it like she kind of bumbles at it. Like she's kind of like, oh my God, I thought this was gonna work out a little bit better than I thought it was. And so it's not the easiest transition for her. I imagine it's not an easy job. You had somebody who was doing it for 25 years, and now you step into it, and she's been at this for 11, and now she is getting to be the lead of something that is massive. You know what I mean? It's like 200 employees. Like it's a massive undertaking. And what if she's not as crisp and clear and sharp as AB as she thought she was going to be? And I thought that was just kind of a fun way to play it.
Every single episode also has so many different points and timelines, and sometimes it's very small differences. And it's
Mhm.
what was the beginning of the night before they all found out what happened to AB versus later in the night. And then
Mhm.
there's kind of all the subsequent things. You've got when she's testifying, what was your kind of personal approach for really just tracking all of the nuances and the minute differences that were going to exist in those different timelines, episode by episode?
That's good because we block shot. So we did not shoot in order. So really the technique we used was like the director kind of yelling out like, okay, we're in this scene now at this day, this time, because it was almost impossible to keep track of. We shot in terms of like what, sorry, we shot in a way that helped us kind of shoot out certain areas of the White House completely. So anything that was going to happen on like the second floor of the White House, that would happen within X amount of weeks. And you would just shoot everything of all the 8 episodes that happened in that area of the White House. And so it was really sort of impossible to kind of stay on top of. You just had to really know the story, really know your character, really know your character's arc, so that you knew, okay, when they called out, we're in this place, this time, this scene, this day, you knew you were doing these lines. you have frame of reference for like, okay, I know where my character is right now. You know, if you need a refresher on that, somebody can, you can always talk to the director, you know, either Liza or Jaffer about it. You could always talk with script supervisor about it and just kind of get a refresher. But when you block shoot, that's the challenge, is to try to remember exactly where you are in the grand scheme of things when you might be shooting a scene from episode, you know, one, and then also a scene from episode four right after. The great thing is that we shot in blocks of four. So the first four episodes were directed by Liza Johnson, the second four by Jafar Mahmood. And so it was very so you never had to think of like more than four episodes at a time. But still, you know, it was, we never really shot in any kind of order.
There's also the aspect of just the production design, the set design on the show is so intricate and detailed and incredible to look at. And for your character, she has to feel like she walks these hallways every single day. She knows every single
Mm-hmm.
thing about these spaces, every single person that she encounters. She knows everything about them. There's a deep-seated history there. And so how did you set about making sure that every kind of interaction and movement felt so intentional and felt like it carried that weight of that history for her?
It had to feel not only like she knows this place really well, but she really loves this place. She's invested in this place. And what was really helpful was how detailed the set was. It was how thoroughly they, down to the last detail, they actually were able to replicate the White House. That was so helpful to me. The language helped, you know. I also definitely didn't want her to just feel like a tour guide. So I had to kind of keep, you know, infusing it with how she felt about these particular rooms, what the feeling that they gave, like, or the fact that, you know, she does know this really well, but she's also really nervous. Like, what is what is all this leading to? What information is Cup and Park getting from this as I'm touring them around? Can I bring them into this area? Should I go in with them to that area? You know, like, um, these are all ways to like color each scene and each sort of tour through the White House so that it doesn't just feel like, oh, this is the red room, the yellow room, the oval room, the library. You know what I mean? You want it to feel like each room has a meaning, a purpose, and sometimes I'm not sure what that's going to lead them to, and that's a little scary.
Yeah, and there's that aspect where she very much becomes the tour guide for Cup and for them,
Hmm.
but also as a result of that is kind of the conduit for the audience learning these spaces and learning this history
Hmm.
and what
That's
everything
right.
around them means. And it, but it also feels like in taking on that role for Cup, that that's how she's able to process her emotions. You know, I can focus on the logistics of this. And so
Hmm.
did you feel that there was this real natural space of this is her zone of comfort, this is what she's good at, and that's how she's going to process her emotions after the fact that she's just witnessed her boss's dead body for the first time?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, you want to cling to where you feel the most comfortable and at ease. And I think you know, she clung to that. Like, I can at least do this. And also, her job is, literally her job is to help and facilitate. So for Cup and Park to put her back in that position felt like natural, like, okay, I can do that, I can help, I can facilitate, I can take you around, I can, you know, give you whatever you need to you know, in these moments to crack this, you know, whatever whatever has happened, any way that I could be a part of facilitating that is helpful. um but it also doesn't mean she's saying everything. You know, it doesn't mean she's telling them all the details of everything that she knows that happens that night. It just means that in these moments I can be as helpful as I can be. And it also gives her something to do. Like, her boss is lying there dead, it kind of helps her to occupy this time where everything is so crazy and so intense, um, to feel like she's a part of solving this is probably a big deal to her.
It also feels like there's a different dynamic when she's testifying and being questioned about the night
Hmm.
itself as well, because that is her being very much outside of her comfort zone and a space that she's familiar with. And you see very quickly that she understands that anything can be twisted, when she uses the word killed and they're like, so you're saying that he was killed. And, she
Right.
kind of understands how they're going to pick apart anything that she potentially says. And how did the idea of it being so outside of her comfort zone, but also being very conscious of the setting and how things were going to be received shape a
Hmm.
lot of that for you?
Well, I think she was really nervous about that hearing because she didn't know what to expect. And first thing out the gate is like, oh my God, I said the wrong thing. Like, oh no. The senator is trying to put her at ease, but there is a feeling of like, um, this is not her environment or any environment that she's been comfortable with or in at all. She's used to being in a very non-political part of the White House where you don't have to deal with any of this. So she's very much a fish out of water, which I found really interesting about that Senate hearing. But as the Senate hearing progresses and you see her later on in the episodes, um, you see that she becomes more comfortable. Like she starts really telling about Lily and the things that she thinks about her, and really talking about how the house was just coming apart, and everything was like um all the tradition and all the things that had been established were being uprooted, and you can see what her frustrations were. So as it progressed, I think she got more comfortable being in that space and speaking the truth about what was really happening over the course of that night.
And the show does this really interesting thing with the entire ensemble of characters in the fact that they're all suddenly set in a space of questioning and not knowing who's responsible for this and kind of
Mhm.
side-eyeing each other. And it doesn't necessarily need to be them going at each other's throats and kind of like outwardly pointing fingers, but there's this whole undercurrent of dialogue that's definitely going on the rest of the time. And for you, where did you find Jasmine in that space of kind of the way that she's just looking at everybody around her completely differently?
Yeah, I found that she herself was trying to put pieces of the puzzle together. Um, I think I kept picturing her like very nervously having her theories about the entirety of what happened that night. But like to me, she was peeking through like this big picture window. And everything was just her like peeking through this picture window and trying to hope nobody sees her, but she's looking at everybody, you know? And that's how I imagined her in most scenes. Um, how she had, you can hear, I think somewhere in episode 3, or like she has her whole theory about, hey, I've sort of put together that it could be the chef and the pastry chef. You know what I mean? Like she's she at various moments is kind of giving her pitch for like, oh, maybe you should look in the direction of the president's best friend. And there's all these little pitches that she has because she keeps peeking through this window and trying to see if she can figure out what was really going on.
And because she's there for so many of the conversations, or she's a conduit to who everybody on staff is, there's also this realization of everybody has a potential motive because the head usher essentially is the person who is the bearer of bad news or has to say no
Yes,
or not give people what they
that's
want. And
right.
do you think she was as fully aware of, oh, whenever I do step into this role, that's going to be me as she was before that night?
Yeah, it's tough when somebody wants to kill the person in the position you want to be in. So it's like, oh God, this isn't the most loved position in the house, is it? But I think that's also what she wanted to be. She wanted to be the person, like, she felt like, oh, you can push back in certain areas. Like, you can speak up. Like, you don't have to, like, play this role of, like, just taking the abuse that certain people would give to AB. She's like, you can speak up, you can talk back, you can fight back, you can push back. If they're putting the gingerbread house, White House that traditionally stands, in the main room for people, for everyone to see in the stateroom, it's like, and they're putting it in the basement, like you can push back on that, like talk, we don't have to play this so traditionally. I think she felt like she was going to bring a real breath of fresh air into the White House. And But in doing so, yes, there's a great responsibility to that. And she felt really ready for that. I think she is. I think that her first few months probably it's a bit of a rough transition, especially the way she was sort of forced into that position. But Jasmine is like very capable and she has a plan. And I think, she's gonna take a little time to like really fit in, but she's doing it. Like she's stepping up, she's stepping to the plate, and she's gonna do it to the absolute best of her ability. That I really felt about her as a character.
Yeah, no, I think that really comes across so clear that like she's ready for this position and she could do
Yeah,
it any moment. Um,
right.
and also in potentially talking spoilers from the last episode, I wanted to talk about that whole sequence of scenes that you all have together, where essentially it's Cup kind of corralling everyone in a singular space, going through her version of events and what happened, and eventually
Hmm.
unfurling who was actually behind it. Because I think it goes back to so many of the things that you were talking about earlier in terms of what you're giving your fellow castmates, never knowing when the camera's going to be on you. And,
Hmm.
so much of it is just pages and pages of dialogue that Uzo has to
Right,
deliver throughout that, which is so
right,
impressive. And
right.
what was your experience for how you found Jasmine throughout that entire sequence of events?
Yeah, that's also challenging again because it's one of those things where it's like you have to stay in it because the camera's always swinging around. It's always catching. It's always like, and also you have to know where you are in the story. You have to track like how suspicious are you in this moment? Are you, angling to be not looked at, or, are you looking at somebody else like they did something? And there's so much going on. There's so much subtext in those moments. That and also a lot of room for humor. Reactions are really funny, so when certain things are revealed and everybody has their specific reaction to it, those are real fun moments that you see everybody's character kind of popping out and what they look like when they're really angry or frustrated or whatever, or relieved or whatever it is. So I think that was it's fun because everybody's there and we're all sort of moving about. But those are also like longer scenes to shoot and longer days to shoot. um I think that one scene in the yellow oval room where she is doing the final big reveal, I think that scene alone, being in that room, took about 4 days. So, you got to be mindful and pace yourself. But again, stay in it, stay active. Um, it's the best thing to do. You're part of a whole, you know what I mean? You're part of a whole. You're telling a whole story, and everyone in it is really important. So being mindful of that is really important in those big group scenes.
Well, I really loved your performance in the show, so thank you so much for
Thank you
talking
so
about it.
much.
Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So great talking to you.